I was just saying we're all happy that you can all join us for today's conference, and particularly for our next speaker, Adelaide Shaw, is going to speak on utilizing the senses when writing haiku. This is being recorded, as Ignatius has said, so if you don't want to be recorded, I suggest you either turn off your camera or leave the room. So what else do I want to say here? So Adelaide B. Shaw, whose website I'm going to put in the chat right now, which is a lot in the chat. So in case you don't know, if you go to chat and to the right of the little file where it says file, is 3 dots. You can save the chat for later. In case you didn't know that, there's a lot of stuff whizzing by, so you might want to do that at certain points. Adelaide B. Shaw has been creating Japanese poetic forms for 50 years and has been published in several journals. Her 3 collections of haiku, An Unknown Road, The Distance I've Come, and Travel Souvenirs are available on Amazon. And some examples of her work are on the website I just gave you. So take it away, Adelaide.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me and see me?
Yes, we can. I can. Perfectly.
Okay. Thank you.
I like your scarf. Your scarf is beautiful, and so are you.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, okay, that gives me a little bit of confidence. I wrote a senator this morning to myself, if I could remember it, on this in the spotlight, my nerves of steel ready to snap and break. So I'm a little nervous to be in the spotlight, but anyway. My talk is about utilizing the senses when writing haiku. I got to get this light out of the way a little bit. There. Okay. Haiku are poems of images. But if someone were to ask, what is an image? You would probably give a dictionary answer that it is a visual representation of what we see. But actually, a haiku is more than just a visual representation of what we see. They are poems about all our senses. We have an experience. Something has affected one or more of our senses, and we write about it. They depict sense images, and sight is only one of our 5 senses: sight, sound, touch, smell, and taste. Now, sight is probably the most dominant of our senses, with taste being the weakest. Touch is there in the middle. So we are bombarded constantly throughout the day by sense stimuli. There's always something to see, to feel, to touch, and sometimes throughout the day to taste. The view from the window, we hear bird sounds, we smell something pleasant from the kitchen. And we don't think anything of it. But sometimes, occasionally, something stops us. We are stimulated strongly or unaffectively, and we sit down and we have to write about it. Now, in some haiku, the senses are specifically mentioned and other senses only implied. With sight being the most dominant of our senses, it's only natural that many haiku are visual images, and what is seen predominates in the haiku. But another sense that is also present is the sense of touch, because the weather is mentioned. Now, weather is usually used as a kigo, which is the seasonal reference, but weather affects us. We sweat, we freeze, you can't escape how you feel because of the weather. And often this affects how we write the haiku, and it influences the reader as well as to how he interprets the haiku. So it is an important sense feeling, weather. So I'm going to read some haiku, how different poets use the different 5 senses, from the ancient poets to some contemporary ones. And I want to apologize to the contemporary poets for not getting in touch with you beforehand to ask for your permission. There just wasn't enough time. But I want to thank you for writing such excellent haiku that fit my talk so well. So the first image is sight. And this one is by Isa. Mr. Toad, your wife is waiting. Your children are waiting. Mr. Toad, your wife is waiting. Your children are waiting. There's only one image in this haiku. It is a visual image, a toad. We have to supply the other images ourselves. Where is the toad? Is it on a path? Is it by the pond? Are there trees around? But Isa just concentrated on what he saw and doesn't tell us anything specifically about what it else. So an example of a sight image with only one. Now, the next haiku by Basho has 2 visual images. Looking carefully, a shepherd's purse under the fence. Looking carefully, a shepherd's purse under the fence. So the 2 visual images are a shepherd's purse, which is an edible plant used throughout Asia. It's so called a shepherd's purse because the seed pod resembles a purse or a sack that a shepherd would carry in which he put his food for the day. Now, haiku, Basho is probably walking through fields, bent over, looking on the ground, when suddenly there in plain sight, he sees the plant he's looking for. And he writes the haiku. The plant has a unique scent, so I've read, a unique scent, a refreshing scent. And readers who know the plant, who knew the plant, would know about this scent, and they could imagine it. But Basho doesn't mention the scent. His poem is all about what he sees. The next is by Shiki, and it has 3 visual images. Morning twilight, in their baskets, the cormorants asleep, exhausted. Morning twilight, in their baskets, the cormorants asleep, exhausted. The 3 side images are the dim light, the cormorants, and the baskets. The reader will complete the image and add more sight images to this poem. He would be familiar with the fishing industry, using cormorants to catch the fish. So he would imagine the fish in separate baskets. He would imagine the boats, the fishermen, the whatever paraphernalia, the fish that was on the boats, the lanterns, used to light up the dawn to attract the fish. Those were three poems using visual images written by some of the well-known ancient poets. Now I have three by contemporary poets. The first one is by Jennifer Hambrick. Queen Anne's lace at the freeway exit, the panhandler's tattered sign. Queen Anne's lace at the freeway exit, the panhandler's tattered sign. There are four visual images here. We have the plant, Queen Anne's lace, the freeway, the panhandler, and the sign he's carrying. What isn't mentioned is sound. This the reader would supply himself because you have a freeway, there's going to be noise of traffic. However, the poet was more impressed by what she saw. And the sound is implied. This is also relies on sight. It is by Brad Bennett. Deer on a meadow path, a morning cloak twitches. Deer on a meadow path, a morning cloak twitches. This is a picture of what the poet sees. The deer, a meadow, and a path, and a butterfly, the morning cloak. Four visual images. It's a finely detailed picture. There's no other reference to other sense images. A reader could imagine perhaps bird calls somewhere in the distance, or maybe complete silence, or maybe a breeze is blowing. But what the poet was impressed by was what he saw. It is a very finely detailed image and very well done. One more with a visual image by Aubrey Cox. Autumn leaves, new neighbors take down the treehouse. Autumn leaves, new neighbors take down the treehouse. We have a tree with the leaves, and we have a treehouse. Visual images. The reader would supply other images such as sound. If we're going to be deconstructing a treehouse, there's going to be a lot of noise and the neighbors talking. So again, it is a corroborative poem where the reader has to add something to bring out the fullness of the haiku. So this leads us to the second of our senses, and that is sound, and it is by Basho. Awake at night, the sound of the water jar cracking in the cold. Awake at night, the sound of the water jar cracking in the cold. Now, Basho is awake or suddenly awakened by the cracking sound of the water jar breaking because the water in it has frozen. And because it is so cold, Basho would have felt it. He would be aware of it. So this gives us a sense of touch because of the cold. This next with sound is by Ryokan. The sound of the scouring of the saucepan blends with the tree frog's voices. The sound of the scouring of the saucepan blends with the tree frog's voices. Now, there are two different sounds mentioned. The scouring of the saucepan. Some woman is scrubbing a saucepan and probably would have used sand in order to scrub the clean. And we have the frogs croaking, another sound. But there would be other sounds a reader would imagine. There'd be the sloshing of the water, either by a brook or a stream, or maybe just in a pot of water in which the woman is working. The poet doesn't say whether he sees this or not, so he's just wrote about what he heard. The scrubbing of the pan and the woman's voice. It's we as readers imagine the scene. The next haiku by Mokuto also has sound, excuse me, as the main sense image. The spring breeze through the barley, the sound of waters. The spring breeze through the barley, the sound of waters. There are three different sounds here. We have a breeze, the swooshing and swishing of the barley, and the sound of water. Could be a pond or a lake, a river. The breeze would make a sound as it blew across the fields of barley. And Mokuto draws our attention to the water and the sound it makes. Or perhaps he is really just saying that the swooshing and swishing of the barley is like that of the water. So we can also imagine the sense of touch, because the breeze blowing against your skin would be cool, and there is a definite feeling there of the breeze. Some examples by contemporary poets. The first is by Gresson Batts. Spring bird song, he turns off the opera. Spring bird song, he turns off the opera. The poet has listed two different sounds, bird song and the opera. There are no visual details here. The poet is an observer. She was standing maybe outside in a room in the doorway and sees a gentleman. We don't know if it's her father or her husband or who the gentleman is. Just that first there were birds, and then the poet watches the man who's listening to the opera. The man realizes there are birds, so he turns off the opera just to listen to the birds. Two different sounds in which the poet is the observer of somebody else's reaction to these sounds, not her own reaction, someone else's, which is fine. Another poem which emphasizes sound is by Elizabeth Searle Lamb, and she really points out the sounds. The sound of rain on the sound of water, of waves. The sound of rain on the sound of waves. Visually, we have rain in the ocean, but the sounds are what is emphasized. First, you hear one sound, rain. Then you hear the second sound, how the rain sounds on the waves. But underneath that is the sound of the waves themselves. So there are three sounds here: the rain, the waves, and the sound that the rain makes when it hits the waves. And the third using sound is by Janet Howie. Breathless heat. The black cockatoos stop screeching. Breathless heat. The black cockatoos stop screeching. The poet mentions the weather and how it physically touches her. It is so hot, she is breathless. So although I'm using this to show sound, there is a definite sense image of touch because of the word breathless heat. You can actually feel the heat yourself. And the cockatoos, you hear them screeching, and then they stop screeching, and there's a sense of relief. And that sense of relief would not be as great if the weather were cool, if the poet had written cool weather. It gives a different feeling by saying breathless heat. You have a different physical sensation in addition to the sound. So this leads me into the next of our senses, and that is touch. This first one is by Itera. The poet is visiting a shrine. The bare roots solid against my feet. First shrine visit. The bare roots solid against my feet. First shrine visit. It's the new year, and it's traditional to visit a shrine. Visually, not much is said about it. In fact, nothing is said about it. The reader who would be familiar with shrines would imagine a torii, which is the gate painted red. And the reader would also imagine other buildings, whether there's a prayer hall or other buildings. The poet is just concerned about how his feet are affected by what he is walking on. He is aware of stepping on roots of plants. They are hard, solid, and the sensory touch is the primary sense image here. This next is by Basho and is also about touch. Clear water, tiny crab crawling up my leg. Clear water, tiny crab crawling up my leg. Now, visually, there is the water, there's the crab, and there's Basho's leg. And suddenly Basho feels something, looks down, and there is a tiny crab. So the side image is, as I said, the water and the crab and his leg. But the emphasis is on the crab crawling on his leg. We can imagine how that would feel depending on how you would be with the crab. You could either laugh at it or jump in fright. We don't know what Basho does. He's only describing the event. This next one is by Basho, and it also has a strong feeling of touch. Coolness of the melons flecked with mud in the morning dew. Coolness of the melons flecked with mud in the morning dew. Visually, there are melons, mud, and the dew. But Basho mentions the coolness. He could have written melons flecked with mud in the morning dew and let it go at that. But he wrote coolness. So how would he know the melons were coolness, the coolness of the melons? Well, obviously he picked them up. He held them in his hands. He could feel the coolness. He didn't just see them. And he could feel the dew on his hands and the dew against his skin. It is a very tactile haiku with a sense of touch. So I'm going to read some 3 haiku by modern poets who use a sense of touch as the main part of their haiku. The first is by Marika Josephson. Sunday morning, kneeling to collect still warm eggs. Sunday morning, kneeling to collect still warm eggs. Visually, we have the picture of a chicken coop, and the poet is gone in is knelt down to pick up the eggs. But the floor could be made of concrete or just the bare dirt, or it could be a covering of wire or wooden slats or some other material. But she's kneeling and her knees are going to be subject to different sensations. It's not going to be comfortable. It's hard, painful, especially if she were kneeling on the wire. But against this uncomfortable sensation is the warm, comfortable sensation of holding these eggs in her hand. A contrast in sensations, the hard painfulness of her knees and the warm, comforting sensation of the eggs in her hand. Another haiku using a sense of touch is by Anna Gates. Summer sky, sticky with cold watermelon. Summer sky, sticky with cold watermelon. So visually, the images are the sky and the watermelon, but this is much more than just a visual image. It is about touch. So it is summer. Imagine the heat. The poet feels the heat and gets a slice of cold watermelon. She feels the cold in her hands. She feels the coldness in her mouth, and it dribbles on her hands, on her face. It's sticky. It's a very tactile sensation to have your hands sticky, your mouth is sticky with the cold, wet watermelon. A very effective haiku showing touch. One more with this sense, and this is by Rin Whitley. There are 4 visual images, but the visual images give a very strong sense of touch, which the reader would imagine. Back in the long grass, my bare feet, my ankles, knocked by bluebells. Back in the long grass, my bare feet, my ankles, knocked by bluebells. Visually, there's the grass, feet, ankles, and bluebells. So the poet would be very much aware of different sensation, the tickling sensations on his bare skin by the grass. It is summer and it is probably hot, but the grass around his feet and ankles would most likely be a lot cooler than the air above where he's walking. So we are made aware of these physical sensations without the poet telling us what he feels. It is all in the visual details that gives us the tactile sensations. This next one is by Kristen Riggs and is about a kiss, and that is a very physical sensation. Goodbye kiss, soft moonlight touches the last summer roses. Goodbye kiss, soft moonlight touches the last summer roses. Moonlight and roses, a very romantic picture here. But the stronger sense is that of touch, very physical. Now, the goodbye kiss, I imagine a long, lingering, heartfelt kiss. And the air is pleasant, and so you can imagine the fragrance of these summer roses adding to a sensory image to the haiku. So adding to this sense of touch, the poet uses the word touches in line 2, soft moonlight touches. She could have written soft moonlight shines, but that doesn't add the same feeling by using the word touches. It gives another physical sensation, adding to the first line, the goodbye kiss. This leads me into the sense of smell. And this first is by Basho. A fishy smell, perch guts in the water reeds. A fishy smell, perch guts in the water reeds. Now, Basho is clear about the smell. He tells us a fishy smell and gives us some visual images as well. The perch guts and the water reeds. So the water would be a pond or a lake, and the reeds would be in marshy water, which would have its own particular smell. So it is summer, and it's a very smelly situation. Perch guts rotting in the water reeds and the smelly marshy water. Not a very pleasant moment. The next is also by Basho with the sense of smell. I don't know which tree it comes from, that fragrance. I don't know which tree it comes from, that fragrance. This is lacking in visual detail, except what we supply ourselves. We don't know where Basho is. Is he in a grove of trees or just passing some trees, standing in a small village with some trees nearby? But suddenly he stops his walk because he's aware of a fragrance coming from a tree. So Basho doesn't know what it is. We don't know what it is, but the reader has to imagine what kind of tree he's standing under and imagine our own fragrance. So the reader is supplying the fragrance and the sense of smell to this haiku. This next one is Kire, uses a sense of smell as well as sight and touch. A lodging for the night, mosquito smudge from rank weeds. A lodging for the night, mosquito smudge from rank weeds. It's summer. It would be hot and sticky. Mosquitoes are buzzing about. And the two odors are smoke from the smudge and the weeds themselves. The poet is burning the weeds, and so they give out a particular smell, the smoky smell and the weeds themselves. So strong odors, and again, not a very pleasant evening for the poet sleeping in this lodge. Today, some contemporary poets using the sense of smell. I'm sorry, yes, smell. Wood stoves glow, the scent of oranges studded with cloves. Wood stoves glow, the scent of oranges studded with cloves. Visual images are the stove and the oranges with the cloves, and the air is filled with this wonderful spicy fragrance. There's also the sense of touch in that you can imagine the poet has the oranges in her hand. She's picking up the sticks of cloves and inserting them into the orange to give off this wonderful spicy fragrance. And also another aspect is in the sense of touch, the wood stove is glowing. So the stove, if it's glowing, it's going to be hot. It's giving off heat. The poet is going to feel that. So another sense is the sense of touch as well as the sense of smell. In this next by Victor Ortiz, there are three sense images: smell, sight, and touch. Through a meadow, a path to the outhouse, summer breeze. Through a meadow, a path to the outhouse, summer breeze. The visual image is there's a meadow, a path, and the outhouse, and for the sense of touch, there's the breeze providing a cooling experience, and it's carrying different fragrances. You have the wonderful fragrance of a meadow with perhaps wildflowers, the freshness of the meadow as contrasted to the smell from the outhouse. So two different odors competing with each other's, but there they are, two odors. The next is by John Dunphy and is also strong on the sense of smell. Cold snap, that scent when the furnace first clicks on. Cold snap, that scent when the furnace first clicks on. Now, line 1, cold snap, to me indicates that it hadn't been cold and suddenly it's a cold snap. And so the sudden change in weather, the sense of touch, he's feeling the cold, but we also have a sound in this haiku. The furnace clicks on. So this gives us a sound. Dunphy could have said the furnace turns on, but it gives us another sense image by saying clicks. And the sense of smell, if you've ever had a cold, an oil burning furnace, which I had, I lived in a very old house with a very old furnace. And every time that furnace clicked on the first time, at the first cold snap, there was a strong, acrid odor that lasted for a couple of hours. So very effective, this haiku on the sense of smell. The last of the 5 senses is that of taste. And Busan says, green plums, the eyebrows, the beauty are gathered together. Green plums, the eyebrows, the beauty are gathered together. Now, Busan is not tasting anything himself. He's strictly an observer. He watches a beautiful woman tasting green plums, and they are so bitter, she knits her eyebrows together. And he writes about the woman's reaction to the stimuli, not his own. This next one is by Isa, and again, the poet is the observer, he's not tasting. The beautiful girl munching and rustling the wrapped up rice cake. The beautiful girl munching and rustling the wrapped up rice cake. Visually, we have a girl eating a rice cake because it is an ongoing activity, munching and rustling. You get the impression the girl is enjoying it. So it gives us a sense of taste. And we also have some sound with the munching. Another haiku by Isa, again, he is strictly an observer. Wild persimmons, the mother eating the bitter parts. Wild persimmons, the mother eating the bitter parts. Visually, you can imagine a mother plucking some wild persimmons, and she has a child or children standing around waiting to eat. But she doesn't want to give them the whole persimmon because there's going to be some parts that aren't going to taste as good. So she eats them herself. And because they are bitter, she's probably going to make a face, and Isa records this. It was interesting in looking through haiku books written by the masters. I found it was very hard to find something about taste. And the ones that I did find, the poet wasn't doing the tasting himself. He was strictly an observer. in contrast to that, I had no trouble finding contemporary poets writing about how something tasted. And the poets themselves are the ones doing the tasting. This first one is by Michael McClintock. Letting my tongue deeper into the cool, ripe tomato. Letting my tongue deeper into the cool, ripe tomato. So you can imagine the taste sensation. It's hot. He goes out, he picks a riper tomato. Maybe it's early morning before the tomatoes have a chance to get warm, and it's under the leaves. And the first taste would be wonderful and pleasant in midsummer. Michael Garofalo again uses taste as well as sight and touch. Dry wind, the sweetness of the last cherry. Dry wind, the sweetness of the last cherry. Even summer, there's a dry wind, it's hot, uncomfortable, and the poet has the last cherry, and it's probably because it is the last cherry is why it tastes so sweet, a very pleasant sensation on his tongue. One more on the sense of taste, and this is by Martin Lucas. It's also about a kiss. After the goodbye kiss, the sweetness of the russet apple. After the goodbye kiss, the sweetness of the russet apple. Now, visually, we can imagine two people saying goodbye and kissing. So there is the sense of touch. But lines 2 and 3, the sweetness of a russet apple gives us the sense of taste. But we don't know, is the apple as sweet as the goodbye kiss? Or is it in contrast to a less than sweet goodbye kiss? The poet doesn't say, and it is up to the reader to use his imagination, whether it is a sweet goodbye kiss or is it just the opposite? And the apple is what is pleasant in this scene. So this brings me to the end of all the 5 senses. We've covered them all. But I just want to say that when writing a haiku, perhaps after you finished it and you have emphasized one sensation of one of your senses, you might want to think about, was there anything else that affected you, that made you want to write it in the first place? Maybe it wasn't just what you've seen. Now, I've done that, and I've gone back later and realized, yeah, I could have added something else to make a better, stronger haiku. And just to show you what I mean, I'm going to show you 2 of mine. Both had been published, and the first one, it was published, this is the way it was published. The drive home, giving the right of way to wild turkeys. The drive home, giving the right of way to wild turkeys. But as I recall, the incident, it was a hot drive home. I wasn't in any mood to delay my drive home, to have a cold drink, you know, a cool shower. And here we're delayed. We've got to stop for this family of wild turkeys crossing the road. I didn't say anything about the weather. So in looking back, I could have added another sense to this haiku by describing the weather. The hot drive home, giving the right of way to wild turkeys, would give a whole different feel, gives a whole different feeling to this haiku by adding another sense image to a haiku. And I'll do one more of mine, and which I would rewrite it today. This is how I first wrote it. Still standing, just a chimney girded with vines. Still standing, just a chimney girded with vines. Now, this is a completely silent picture. A chimney and vines, you can imagine an old dilapidated house, crumbling, and that's what it was. We were driving through a once fashionable vacation area that had come to hard times. The houses were in rack and ruin, dilapidated, and I saw this foundation and just a chimney wrapped around with the poison ivy vines. And that's all I wrote about. But in thinking back about it, it wasn't just a silent picture. There were other things going on. There were crows squawking around. And if you know your literature and symbols, crows are a symbol of dread and death and destruction. It's crows and ravens. They don't tell of happy times. So I didn't add anything about the crows, but I would do so now. I would rewrite it as squawking crows, still standing chimney girded with vines. Squawking crows, still standing, the chimney girded with vines. So my advice to people, especially newcomers to haiku, although you can write excellent haiku using just one of the senses, and we do that. There are excellent haiku using just visual images or sound images. But once you've written it, stop and think about it. Pause. Give yourself time to reflect on what else was going on when you had that experience. Maybe you can enhance the whole experience of what you felt and enhance it for the reader by adding another sense experience, some sound, some fragrance, something that touched you. If nothing else, you might get 5 or 6 separate haiku, each emphasizing a different sense image. So just pay attention to all your senses. After all, we are sensual beings. We are bombarded constantly by what's around us. And we can put all these sensations into our haiku. Thank you for listening. Now,
Thanks, Adelaide.
I see I kept it within 50 minutes. Yay to me.
We have, I was keeping my eye. Thank you very much. That was excellent. I really enjoyed that. And I was trying to keep an eye on the questions and comments that were coming in the chat. And I had a few that also I want to know about. One came in from Claire Vogel Camargo, and it gets to your last point, I guess. How many senses are too many? Like, is there, could we use, do you limit it to 2 or 3 or?
Well, I think limit to your own good sense. There is such a thing as, as overloading a haiku. Like you don't want to overload it with visual images, then it reads like a grocery list. Sometimes you can have, you're seeing too much, and it may call for more than one haiku. So if you're feeling too much, you have too many sensations hitting you at once, it may be too much, but 2 or 3, I'm not going to give a number, because each poem is going to be separate unto itself, and is going to win or lose Not because it has a certain number of sense images, but because how everything fits together. Just read it after you've written it. Read how it sounds. Imagine yourself in the situation. Imagine yourself as a reader and whether you'd feel it as you were just being thrown things just because the poet wanted to get everything, the whole experience. As I said, sometimes you will have to maybe just concentrate on one or two and then write several about the same incident, but each one emphasizing something else or one or two other sense images. That's my own experience.
Thank you. Another thing I think I caught, or at least it's one of my questions also, is when do you say, for example, the scent of, or the sound of, or the feel of, instead of just presenting the source of the sensory experience? Is there any rule of thumb on that?
No, there's no rule of thumb. It is just how it comes out in your wording. You know, in for example of I'm going to like the sound in Basho, awake at night, the sound of the water jar cracking in the cold. Now, it was emphasizing the sound, but I suppose he could have written awake at night, the water jar cracking in the cold, without telling you the sound of it. Now, so maybe that's in the translation. I don't know. I don't read Japanese, so I don't know if Basho himself wrote the word sound, or if he's actually said, it was translated by Robert Haas. So I don't know, but I don't think you have to mention the sound of something. You don't, when you're writing a haiku that's visually, you don't say the sight of the tree, you're just writing the tree. So I don't think you have to mention, you know, the feel of the melon or the taste of the tomato. It's just how it you word it, how the wording fits, how it flows better. I mean, just how you write it to conveys, you know, sound itself or the taste itself. Like on the sense of taste, Michael McClintock does not tell you he's tasting. He just writes, letting my tongue deeper into the cool, ripe tomato. He doesn't say letting my tongue taste. You know, it's you know he's tasting. I mean, you have to give the reader some credit to know what you're talking about.
Right.
Because, you know, haiku are poems that the poets write and the reader interprets. So
Adelaide. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
And
that answers it.
I have
ahead.
also, how do you come down on the idea of this synesthesia, where we're mixing senses, like you say, something like the sound of red? You know what I'm saying? Do you use this?
I know what you mean. I have mixed feelings about that. It depends. I mean, if you mentioned the sound of red. I suppose if the poem is feeling angry and writing about anger, maybe it works. I don't know. I haven't used it much myself. In fact, I don't recall ever using it. I don't know. I
Okay.
have mixed feelings about it because I have trouble visualizing sometimes that.
Adelaide,
So we do
I'd
have
leave
a
that
few
to
more,
Somebody else.
we do have a few more minutes in case we have any more questions. We have just a couple of more minutes for the next presentation. I guess we can open the mics and whoever wants to say something.
I've got a question commentary. Adelaide, do you use, I missed part of your presentation. I was out of the room, but did you talk about onomatopoeia and the fact that that is a good way to create the sense of senses without actually saying what they are?
Oh,
Like
God,
clang,
I'm
like clang
going-
and whoosh.
I'm sorry. Give me your question again.
Well, onomatopoeia, in other words, the bell clangs is
Oh,
know,
yes, yes.
or your vision is just cloudy scene. I can't do it right now, but
No,
that's-
I know
that's
what you
another
mean.
tool.
Like you would say, like the scrunching of footsteps on gravel. Scrunching just gives us an actual sound of walking on gravel. Is that what you mean? Using words?
Yeah.
Yeah.
In other
right.
words,
No, I think
just
that's
say-
great. I think if there is a word choice that you can make that gives an actual sensation of the action itself, that's great. Like, cracking's a great word. It's the Basho of cracking. No, where is it? The cracking in the code. Cracking is a great word because when something cracks, that sound almost sounds like the word itself, cracking. And
Onomatopoeia.
there are other words like swishing and swooshing, barley swishing, waves crashing. Yeah, that adds a lot to a haiku by using words that the words themselves sound like the action.
A scream rings in my ear would be one that you could use, something like that.
A scream?
Yeah, rings in my ears, kind of implying that it goes on for a long time.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, it's I'm getting tongue-tied and I'm getting, excuse me, I gotta have a drink of water. There are a lot of devices that people use it in haiku, and it depends on the particular poem and the poet. I always say read aloud what you've written. Read it aloud a few times. Give yourself a couple of days. And if you have an audience, a child, a husband, oh God, thank God for husbands and who used to listen to my stuff all the time. Get a non-haiku poet's reaction if you can.
A very good point. And also to get a haiku group, if you can find one online or in person, it always helps. Have a sounding board. So I think we've run out of time. Thanks
you,
again.
everybody.
Thanks again, Adelaide. That was fantastic.